Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast.
Okay, folks, so here we are in the post-residential ITC, that's the investment tax credit world. The residential customer-owned tax credit is gone, but it does not mean that the tax credits are completely gone, because there are different tax credits that just don't go to regular human beings. They have to go to something that's a little bit superior to the human being, and that is called the corporation. That's right. You better get a corporation now. One of the big benefits of having a corporation is that corporations don't do time. There's no such thing as a corporation jail. And of course, corporations do have the right to buy politicians. Remember, money is speech. Our corporation's kind of strange anyway. They're just made up entities. They're just part of all of our collective imagination. They're words written on papers, inside of computer hard drives. But corporations, they have a lot of rights. So let's get a little bit historical now. Do you remember President Biden and the Inflation Reduction Act? That was signed into law on August 16th, 2022. It gave $369 billion to all these good climate things, including $100 billion for developing clean energy projects. But hey, what's $100 billion these days anyway? Grants, loans, zero emission projects. Anyway, people in the solar industry were stoked when the Inflation Reduction Act came out. Unfortunately, for the renewable energy industry, the Inflation Reduction Act, which we were counting on and didn't even really imagine that it could disappear, ran into some trouble. It was trimmed by what some people call the OBBB, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and that was passed on July 4th of 2025. That's right, that's when our country did a turn and declared independence from the atmosphere.
This podcast was brought to you by AIR. Take a breath and experience air yourself. Don't forget to breathe.
And so here's the hard part to remember, but maybe not so hard because they did make it on Independence Day. So a year after that bill passed, there's two ways of getting that tax credit. One of them is you have to begin construction by July 4th, 2026. And by the way, too, they call this 48E for people that like to have fancy number letter combinations. 48E, not 25D. That's over, man. That's in the past. So you have to either start it by July 4th, 26, which by the time you're listening to this might have already passed, or placed in service by December 31st, 2027. So there you have it. So there's a couple of dates we have to memorize. July 4th, 2026 has to be started by then. Then you can finish it later, or finished by December 31st, 2027. So once 2028 rolls around, you might be kind of out of luck unless you started it by July 4th, 2026. So let's see if you can remember those dates. Okay, you have to start it. If you start your project by what date do you qualify? And that's right, Independence Day, 4th of July, 2026. Or if you finish it by, what's that date? And that is the end of the year, 2027, the last day of 2027. That's New Year's Eve. So those are two of my favorite holidays. Those are the fireworks days, July 4th and December 31st. Woo! Fireworks! Fireworks probably aren't good for the environment either. You're like sending up gunpowder into the atmosphere and igniting it. Wow. So another thing that I like to think about here is that what if we look at this from a different point of view? So one of the things that people are going to do when they have these deadlines is they're going to get things started before July 4th, 2026, or they're going to get them finished before December 31st, 2027. And we have elections. When are these elections? Midterms, November 2026. So what's that going to look like? We're going to have people rushing to get jobs finished during these midterms. So it's going to look like the economy is rolling on solar because people are going to try to get it done before it expires. So it is my conspiracy theory that they did that on purpose so that the people that made these rules can get reelected. Like my conspiracy theory, I'm not saying it's true. I just like getting people all warped on conspiracy theories. So remember the fireworks, July 4th, 2026, or the last day of 2027. And that is for the 30% investment tax credit. And of course, what that means is 30% of the price of the project, you get essentially a tax credit, so you don't have to pay that much in taxes. So if you had $1 billion worth of projects, like we all do, and you qualified for that 30% tax credit, that's 30% of $1 billion. That is 300 million. And that's how much money I have in the bank. So just remember that commercial tax credit is still around. So even if it's a solar system on a house, you can still get the tax credit if you're not a homeowner. You can get it if you're a corporation.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show.
So one of the things that people are doing is they're making leases that look similar to how it looked when there was the residential tax credit. And let's just talk a little bit about what that residential tax credit was. They called it 25D for that number letter combination. And that expired on December 31st, 2025. So now humans can't get that tax credit, only the superior corporation can. And we can look at these things as leases, power purchase agreements, that's PPAs, or we can call that TPO for third-party ownership. Also, TPO is thermoplastic polyolefin. That's a single-ply membrane roof. So what does it mean to have your system started by 4th of July, fireworks, Independence Day? What does that mean? And let's call it the 5% rule. And that just means that they need to incur 5% of the total project cost with at least a non-refundable deposit on modules, racking, or inverters before that date to get it started. So that's one way of doing it, the 5% rule of getting that project started by Independence Day 2026. Otherwise, there's something called the physical work test, and you can have significant physical work like foundations, roads, racking, and that must start on-site or off-site for custom manufacturing. Okay, so one thing about the One Big Beautiful Bill is it did not end the storage tax credit. And so still we have like what the ITC gave us, 2033, before you start phasing out with that standalone storage tax credit, which hopefully they'll just renew. So let's look at some other things here too. We still have the prevailing wage requirements. So if you are building a system over 1 megawatt, to get the full 30% tax credit, you need to have people that are getting paid good wages with apprenticeships. So that's still an important thing. Otherwise, it's only a 6% tax credit. And then additionally, there's something called FEOC, Foreign Entity of Concern. But those really important people, they like to just say FEOC and leave you hanging. And you're like, what is that? And they're like, haha, I'm so much smarter than you. And so pretty much what they're looking at is Chinese-made stuff. So if your battery has critical minerals or components from one of these FEOC places, Foreign Entity of Concern, you could be disqualified from the bonus adders. So what can you do? You can write a check for 5% of the project cost, non-refundable, by July 4th, 2026. Lock in that 30% tax credit. So if you're building a big multi-megawatt project, you might want to get that locked in first, because those projects are going to take longer than the 18 months from July 4th, 2026, all the way until December 31st. Happy New Year, 2027. And you just wouldn't be able to finish the project in that much time, probably, in America. So let's sum it up. The residential customer-owned tax credit is dead. But business-owned systems, you still get that tax credit. A couple of different ways to do it. Start the project by Independence Day 2026, or finish the project by New Year's Eve 2027. In standalone storage, that means storage without solar. Doesn't mean standalone like not touching the grid. They're not affected this way. However, you do have to worry about foreign entities of concern, like for battery minerals and stuff like that. So just hang in there and we will survive.